Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Research America Alliance member web meeting. I'm Jenny LeRae. Thank you for being Alliance members as always and for joining us today. Since we're using the Zoom webinar format, all audience members are on mute for now. We'll unmute the lines at the end of Pete's presentation and mine, or you can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time, and we will field them throughout today's discussion. So our guest today is Pete Kirkham, president of Red Maple Consulting. Pete, it's been a busy last few days and looks like a busy lame duck session.
It's going to be a wild ride between now and the election and then to the end of the year. So I guess we all better buckle up and get ready for lots of fun and lots of unpredictability. So a couple things to talk about this afternoon, and then I know Jenny and I are happy to take any questions you might have. Three things that we wanted to touch on. One is what's the state of play on FY20, FY21 CR. Two, state of play on coronavirus relief negotiations. And three, in a nonpartisan 501c3 appropriate way, talk about what's going on with the election, what should we be thinking about, how to look at things. So with respect to the CR, it sure looks like the package that passed the House last night with an overwhelming bipartisan vote is going to be passed by the Senate, looking to be Thursday. The anomalies that got added at the last minute were additional aid for farmers as well as for nutrition assistance for poor families. So I think it's a typical situation where it's going to be just what everything is on autopilot with a little bit more money for a couple of programs favored by both sides. And Senate passes it Thursday. I assume the president signs it into law Friday, Saturday, and things move along. The other thing that I've picked up from some very reliable and plugged in sources is apparently the COVID-19 negotiations have started again. And ultimately, that's probably going to be Secretary Mnuchin and Speaker Pelosi if this is real. And what could we look for? What are the timelines? We got a couple things going on. Of course, there's the Justice Ginsburg is lying in repose at the Supreme Court, will lie in state at the Capitol on Friday. I believe Yom Kippur is this week as well. So there's a couple of scheduling things that have to happen. But once we get the CR passed, unless there is a COVID-19 package that's really in the offing, I see Congress bolting town and not really coming back to do much, with the exception of the Supreme Court fight, which is going to happen. And if you all haven't been watching the headlines, it sure looks like the president's going to nominate somebody on Saturday. We're going to see hearings probably the second week of October, and then probably a floor vote roughly the 26th of October is what's leaked out as a tentative timeline. Now, of course, we all know that things slip. But on the COVID-19 package, what are we looking at potentially seeing? I think it's in everybody's best interest to reinstate federal supplemental unemployment assistance. It was $600 a week up to the end of July. I think Republicans have been at $400 a week. Speaker Pelosi is seeking $600 a week. You can see compromising at $400 or $500 a week. There's lots of people that need this money, and I think both sides understand that. So we'll see where we end up. The second big sticking point has been aid to state and local governments as well as tribal governments. And is it going to be $1 trillion? Is it $500 billion? I think the Republicans have put on the table $500 billion or something like that. The speaker has asked for $1 trillion or a little bit more. Again, if they all want to do a deal, we've all been around the block. We know that they'll split the number and come up with something. There's certainly plenty of other places to do some things that would be helpful. A second round of Paycheck Protection Program loans or grants, which I know is of great importance to many of the folks that run the entities that are on this call. That is very much on the table. There's wide acknowledgement that needs to happen. There may be some limitations on the size of the entity in terms of employment and as well as income, but so they're trying to target that as well. In addition, the other thing that's on the table for this potential COVID-19 package is another round of direct checks to taxpayers and families. The number that's been bandied about is another $1,500 per person, with more money for kids, for families $70,000 and below on income. We'll see where all this goes, but it is in the mix. We've all learned not to hold our breath too much, but it's very possible. Things are very fluid. Last point to get to before we go to Jenny for an update, and then Jenny and I will be happy to take questions, is the election. And how should we be consuming information? There's a lot of information out there. What's real, what's not, what's really going on. I think we've all learned that looking at either the 538 or the Real Clear Politics averages of polls is a pretty good rule of thumb. It's not entirely 100% accurate, but it's a pretty good rule of thumb, and you're fairly close to what's going to happen, and it gives a pretty good snapshot of things. And if you were to look at those just in the presidential race, a very astute political reporter noted on the air the other day, rather on a podcast I was listening to, that if you look at the battleground states, you realize that essentially all of the states are inside the margin of error. So what does that mean? We've all had statistics class. What does that mean? It means that there are probably two likely outcomes, and they may be equally likely. One is that Vice President Biden could be set up to win 375 plus electoral votes. The other equally likely outcome as of now, because we're in the margin of error, is that President Trump wins re-election because of the Electoral College and the nature of the battleground states. We got a long way to go. We are 5 weeks and X number of days out from Election Day, although there's lots of voting in many states that's already occurring. A long way to go. What should we look for the presidential race? And then I'll shift to the Senate and the House. I think there's two big events that are coming up that are worth noting. One is the first presidential debate, which is the end of next week, I believe. And the second is roughly October 2nd, October 3rd, the final unemployment rate before the election comes out. So that means you get to October 5th, October 10th, we should have, the polls ought to be solidifying, and we'll have a pretty good sense of where things are going. 90%, 92, 93%, depending on the poll, of the public have made up their minds already. So both campaigns are targeting undecideds, which is an increasingly small number. And at some point, the undecideds just don't vote. And the second, both campaigns are trying to get out non-traditional voters, people that don't vote or maybe vote out of every 4 times. And so, and you can't poll those people. It's hard to reach those people and to figure out what's going on. So presidential race, a long way to go. The Senate campaigns, again, if you were to force the election today, it'd probably be a slight Democratic advantage, but not much of one. You'd be at 50, 51 seats. It depends on the coin flip. I think it's more important to be skeptical of polls with Senate and House races, public polls, than with presidential. With presidential, there's enough volume of polls out there that the averages sort of take care of things. With Senate races, and then particularly with House races, you should be very skeptical of public polling, because it's just a function of how is it a high quality poll? Is it a poll that's put out there to push a certain message, or is it intended to be objective? And the thinner the number of polls that are out there to look at, the more unobjective you should assume that these polls are. So it's hard to know. With the very competitive Senate races, there's enough polls out there, should feel pretty good about things. But the rule of thumb that I always have is pay attention to what Charlie Cook and Stu Rothenberg are saying. Where did they rate the races? Because they see internal polling from both campaigns, typically. They see internal polling from the independent expenditure groups. They see internal polling from both political parties. So they have a very good sense of what the real numbers are. And that shows up when they rate something lean Democrat, pure toss-up, lean Republican. You know, you should feel very confident in looking at where the races are and following them. That's certainly what I do. In the House, I don't think that anyone believes that the House majority for the Democrats is in any jeopardy. I fully assume that Speaker Pelosi will be Speaker next year, assuming that she wants to keep the job, and I assume that she does, but the Democrats will be in control in the House. It is, I've seen a lot of internal polling. In a previous life, I was a political hack that ran one of the party committees, so I have friends on both sides of the aisle, and they're able to see a fair bit of polling. And you have several dozen House races where you are well inside the margin of error. Both candidates are at 45 to 47%. Both sides tend to have a whole lot of money. And it's too soon. It's September 23rd. We got a long way to go. House races will break later. And we don't know if there's going to be a national wave that extends through the House like there was in 2016 and there was in 2018. We don't know that yet. If you could see very easily a couple of seats one way or the other, geography favors the Republicans, momentum and cash favors the Democrats. So that's a real short summary of where we are on both the CR, on the stimulus, and on the elections. Happy to answer any questions you might have. Jenny?
Thanks, Pete. Always very informative, and succinct. Thank you. We actually do have a question already. This is about the SUP. Do you think there will be anything in the COVID-19 package that will actually address the virus? You know, i.e. funding to NIH, medical research, et cetera.
You would think so, again, because there is broad bipartisan agreement on spending hundreds of billions of dollars on most of the topics I mentioned, as well as additional money for NIH, additional money to get the vaccine out there. If you've been paying attention to Politico, I think, or maybe it was New York Times, there was an article yesterday or the day before that said that because of the way the law is written, there's some quirk in Medicare law. So Congress has got to pass something to make immunization free for Medicare recipients. I mean, of course, all members want to do that stuff. So I can see all of those things happening. In addition, labor age leadership, House and Senate, both sides of the aisle are very cognizant of the impact of COVID-19 on all the other research and research labs around the country. They're very worried about it. They know they need to get money to labs, get the money to institutions, because we need to preserve the institutions, and we also need to preserve the workforce. So they're very cognizant of those things.
Great. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
Well, let me go back to the SUP. So the CDC has already sent out a package of information to states and localities to get them ready for the distribution of the vaccine. I know there's some funding that's been batted around that. There's a lot of concern that people may not be properly educated about the safety of the vaccines, and lots of surveys showing, you know, some hesitancy and lack of confidence.
Right.
Do you foresee funding in the SUP, in this SUP, or would that be later in the year to deal with the vaccine distribution and education?
Sure. I think, again, the members of Congress on both sides of the aisle understand there's a real problem out there. So we have the usual election year noise, and it's important not to get too bought into that stuff. But there are some real baseline issues. One is there's a real anti-vax movement that's out there, and this predates COVID-19. And in a low information environment, you can see how people might become more concerned about those things. In addition, we're going to be rolling out a vaccine, presumably, God willing, that we're going to have one or more vaccines that are approved in an appropriate and timely manner. They're going to be rolling out quick, and the public is going to need to be educated. So I think members are going to want to put as much money as they need, and probably more than they probably need at this. They understand there's a real public health risk both sides, again, leaving the campaign rhetoric aside, both sides understand how serious this is and how important it is to get the economy back up and running. You can't get the economy back up and running until you have one, public health is restored, and two, the public believes that public health has been restored.
Thanks, Pete. I'm just encouraging our listeners to either unmute yourself and ask a question, or put it in the Q&A box. So let's go to politics, which you covered quite well. How does the Supreme Court situation impact the election in your view?
The real answer is nobody knows. It's too early. It very well could. I think it's certainly plausible to say that in 2018, the entire experience with respect to Justice Kavanaugh cost the Senate Democrats a number of seats, but they were already, the candidates that lost, Heidi Heitkamp, Joe Donnelly, and others, were already in trouble and already in states that were moving out from under them. So did that help tip the balance? Very possibly. So, but we don't know with this election. My gut instinct is that because the electorate is so energized on both sides of the aisle, I think anybody that would be energized by this is already going to vote and probably already knows how they're going to vote. I don't see great masses of people, making a decision based on this. I think they're already going to vote. There's two universes of voters that both sides are going after. One is, and I talked about this before, one is the true undecideds, and there's not that many of them. And at some point, if you're undecided on November 1st, you're not voting. And then the second universe is people, the non-traditional voters that don't vote most of the time. They don't care about the Supreme Court. I personally don't think.
Okay, thanks, Pete. Well, we've got several great questions. So, question, China. How much concern is there on the Hill about competition with China? Do you think this is an election issue?
I think there's enormous concern on both sides of the aisle. And I think that, again, leaving aside the president's rhetoric and style, there is enormous support for reevaluating and fixing is the wrong word, reevaluating our China policy and finding a new direction to proceed in. I think both sides feel very strongly about that. And if you notice, Vice President Biden, while pretty much a free trader, has not said that he is going to repeal the existing tariffs. So I think we're going to see a lot of movement, a lot of hearings, a lot of policy changes, regardless of who wins the election over the course of the next year.
Terrific. More recent lame duck sessions of Congress have been surprisingly productive. Mm-hmm. But what happens in a lame duck session that occurs after or during, if the vote is delayed, a divisive SCOTUS nominee fight?
Well, a couple things. One is, yes, there is a lot of emotion out there over the Supreme Court fight, but remember who we're talking about here. We're talking about politicians. And a lot of the outrage that you see is performative. They can turn it on, turn it off. So there's a good bit of this that's theater, and they're playing to their bases, and they're playing for the TV cameras. Having said that, are there going to be some hard and raw feelings? Yes. You can't go through bruising fights like this, because at the end of the day, these are institutions, and these institutions are made up of people. And relationships matter in Washington. Relationships are how things get done. Mm-hmm. The CR is only going to run till the middle of December. If Vice President Biden wins, I would expect that the appropriations gets kicked into next year. But there is a very strong case, and we used to do it this way, where the incoming administration says, just get the existing fiscal year done. We'll do a supplemental, but get it done, and we'll fix the 10% we don't like in a supplemental bill. I expect that we're going to see the whole thing kicked to next year. So that means there's not a lot of big bills to move. Are there lots of small, narrow bills that will pass 100 to nothing that are being held hostage right now. There's dozens and dozens of those, but I don't see big changes coming down the pike in the Water Resources Development Act or other things like that. I think everything gets kicked to the new year.
Okay, well, keep on your prognosticator hat.
Uh-oh.
Would you be willing to handicap the race for the next chair of the House of Probes Committee? I
think it's Congresswoman DeLauro. I think she is, I believe, well, she's not the senior member running, but she is a long-time substantive and political force inside the Democratic caucus. 2 is an ally of long-standing of the Speaker. And 3, I think the members of the committee and the members of the caucus trust her. I think they trust that she can deliver on their priorities, and she can also deliver on getting the bills done. Certainly, I believe the competition's Congresswoman Capter and Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz. They both are very accomplished people. But my instinct is, and this is based on talking to people who are plugged in, is that Congresswoman DeLauro is the favorite and possibly the prohibitive favorite.
Okay, so we have one more question, and then we're going to talk about our Vote Science Strong initiative, which we're very excited about. The question is a follow-up to the earlier China question.
Okay.
So do you see, regarding the China concerns, do you see this impacting researchers from China conducting research in the US? Is that going to be part of the conversation?
Yes. I mean, again, I'm sure everyone has seen a lot of the news articles over the last year and a half with respect to researchers being flagged for not revealing the full extent of their employment in China, i.e. being members of the Communist Party, being members of the People's Liberation Army, of spying, and let's not be naive. Every major power spies on every other major power, so nobody's pure here. But I do think that there is a real sense, based on a lot of fact, that the Chinese government certainly and other countries around the world view our research institutions as porous and as fairly soft targets. So I think we can see a couple things coming down the pike the next year and a half. And certainly arguing for funding for these is going to be important. One is, who are you employing? Have you done your due diligence? 2 is, how robust is your computer security and your data security? And 3, what specific topics are you delving into, and what are the sources of your other funding? Those things are going to be, I think, fairly high profile. And 4, I think the status of the Confucius Institutes on many campuses around the country is going to be in question.
Pete, thank you. As always, terrific, insightful,
yep, I tap
concise,
dance.
Tap dance, yep. No, we really appreciate it. So we're going to say goodbye to you now, unless you would like to learn more about our Vote Science Strong initiative.
I will listen in off camera.
All right, that's great, terrific. All right, so I am going to pull up this initiative. We have put together, we meaning Research America, with some help from AAAS and Sigma Xi and the American Geophysical Union, but we have put together, I think, a pretty cool site, which we are hoping that you and your members will use in the next 6 weeks to really inject a very pro-science, pro-research message in the remaining weeks of this election cycle. And we also think these are messages that we will certainly continue to use them with regard to folks who are elected once they're elected. So there's 2 components. Let's look at the voter page. So you enter here. And let me say that this is strictly nonpartisan. We're C3. We've done everything by the book. So for some of you and some of your members, some of the language may be timid, but it certainly passes muster in terms of being nonpartisan. But I also think that with the facts and figures that we've also provided, it really makes a robust case for research and science. So the Learn section is resources. So there are broad science policy resources, which only some of which I think will be of interest to folks on the phone today. So here's some just really good overall data on US R&D spending over time, really making the case, obviously, for a much stronger investment. And then we have social and behavioral sciences here. But the part that is really going to be of most interest to our Alliance members will be all of our fact sheets, which have been updated. So they're about not only diseases, but health research agencies, public health, and investment trends as well. And then we have our investment report, which I think most of you are familiar with. We also have some information about the R&D pipeline and how it works. And then we also have our whole collection of survey data. So what is this for? This is background so that you can then engage, you and your members. So how to engage? One way, teletown halls. So here's a site which lists federal candidates' teletown halls, which are open to the public. I'll open it quickly. Let's see if it is quick. So basically you put in your zip code and it tells you if there's a town hall in your area. Now, obviously it depends on whether or not the candidate has provided this information. So it certainly isn't exhaustive, but I think it does give a lot of opportunities across the country for folks to participate. And then to make it easier to participate, we have a whole slew of sample questions, which we've written with a talking point and then a question. So you can go through these. You'll be familiar, I think, with the messaging and the data. Sorry about that. Whoops. I'm sorry about that. I think I cut myself off there. All right. Thank you for your patience. All right, I just want to get to our social media toolkit. So we know a lot of candidates are on Twitter, they're on Facebook, less so on LinkedIn. So we've created some templates that you can use, as well as some messages that you can insert into those templates. So we give you some tips on length and style, using hashtags. And then we have broad science tweets. And then if you scroll down, we have a lot of tweets around medical research. And we also have graphics. And we know that graphics tend to attract more information. More attention from folks on Twitter and the folks that you've tweeted at. So the idea here is that you would find out the Twitter handle for the candidate, which is very easy by just going on their website, and then you would tweet at them. And the idea would be to try to get a response or to have others who are following that account to join with you and echo that pro-research, public health message. And then we have the voting section, which doesn't have an engagement component. It's really just information for you and your members to around registration, where to vote, public health recommendations when voting, and also to look up your elected officials. And then we have a candidate page, which we will be driving candidates to, which has a lot of these same resources. So I am going to stop there. I'm going to see if anyone has any questions. Let's see. It looks like people may not have been able to see the material.
This is Pete. Sarah got it up for most of it.
Okay. All right, great. Sorry about that, everybody. I'm going to ask my team, should we go over it a little bit more, or we'll send it out to everybody? What we'll do is we'll follow it up. We'll follow up with you so that you have this. And we would love to have any additional information that you would like to share with others. Well, it's very easy to add things to the site, other fact sheets, other resources, even messages, sample op-eds, or LTEs. So we're really open to continuing to, make this really dynamic and something that, people are excited about using. Sarah, thank you for helping me share the site. I think we will end the call unless folks have questions about the Vote Science Strong initiative or anything that Pete shared. Okay, all right. Well, thank you all. We appreciate your support of Research America and all the work that you're doing. And we look forward to talking with you very soon.